And we did 2 of them, right? Did we get a chance to put the second thesis statements up on the board?
Yeah.
Okay, great. All right, and we were talking about Immanuel Kant's critique of reason. Philosopher, big famous philosopher, and he talked about how you develop sort of your knowledge of the world in 2 ways. One is through a priori knowledge, which are these categories of understanding that you just have when you were born. You understand space and time in some sort of rudimentary way. And then the other way is through experience, which he divided into the sensible experience, which was everything that you feel, sensibile. And feel means emotions and actually sensory feelings. And he said that this is passive knowledge of the world. And then he said that the other way we develop knowledge is through understanding. This is our reason, our powers of rationality, and this is active, and we can kind of determine how we think about things, and you can change that part of it. So if those 2 things sort of like work together, and this is where we'll start, where you can start taking notes again. If those 2 things work together to give you knowledge about the world, this is also the 2 things that are working together to show you what, to give you an ethical understanding of the world, which means these 2 things working together show you how to act in certain situations. And Kant believed in what was, well, he made up this idea, what was called the categorical imperative. As an ethical system. So he said, yes, we understand the world through the sensible and through the understanding. He said, but if you want to make ethical decisions, you try to lean more towards understanding than towards the sensible. He says you are responsible, if you want to be ethical, you're responsible for making decisions based on rationality and reason. And part of that is because of what he called the categorical imperative, which is that you should act in a way that you would be comfortable with everyone acting. Okay, so do things that you would be comfortable with everyone, and this is worldwide, everyone in the world, if they were to do that same thing, you would be okay with that, and that would be an ethical decision. So that makes sense when you're like, yeah, nobody should murder. If I murdered someone, I would not be okay with everyone in the world just going willy-nilly and murdering people, right? So that is not an ethical choice. It gets more complicated though when we're thinking about like all the reasons people have for doing things. So speaking of Les Mis, Kant would not be okay with Jean Valjean stealing that loaf of bread. It's like, yes, his family is starving. Yes, he's looking out for his sister's kids, right? Yeah, his sister's kids, and he wants to make sure that they are okay. That's awesome. Those are all like really noble reasons in the book. Like we're supposed to see that as like we have empathy for him and his family. Kant says we would not be comfortable with every single person in the world stealing a loaf of bread. And he's not thinking about circumstances. He's not thinking, he says, when we make ethical decisions, you shouldn't think about emotions and feelings like hunger. You should be thinking rationally and clearly. We would not be okay with everyone in the world stealing bread, because then what would the bakers do? Where would we get the resources and so on? And so it would not be an ethical decision according to Kant. So it's like this way of like really it's kind of cold, a cold way of looking at what moral decision each person should make. Okay, I think that becomes really important in Pride and Prejudice. And part of that is because it sets us up with these different characters that kind of represent different like parts of different opposites on a spectrum. So we've got on one side Charlotte, and we've got on the other side Lydia. And I think this kind of represents these 2 forms of understanding. And if we think of in this society that they're in, marriage being an ethical choice, which I think it is, because it's not just about who you love, it is also about building up a community. If we think about that, we can also think about the way they make this ethical choice. So let's look at when Charlotte is talking about marriage. She cracks me up. It's in the beginning. I want to say chapter 7. I can get my page numbers here. Chapter 6. Go to chapter 6 of your book. Yeah.
Can I borrow a book?
Yeah, they're just right over there. There's one other one to borrow. Chapter 6. So this is when Charlotte kind of presents her idea on there. She says, find the paragraph that starts, well, said Charlotte, I wish Jane success. Did you find it? Well, said Charlotte, I wish Jane success with all my heart, and if she were married to him tomorrow, I should think she had as good a chance of happiness as if she were studying his character for a 12th month. So she's like, well, if she marries, go ahead, marry Mr. Bingley now, because she has as good a chance of it of happiness, no matter if he ends up being what he says he is. Because happiness in marriage is entirely a matter of chance. If the dispositions of the parties are ever so well known to each other, or ever so similar beforehand, it does not advance their felicity in the least. They always continue to grow sufficiently unalike afterwards to have their share of vexation, and it is better to know as little as possible of the defects of the person with whom you are to pass your life. So this is her view of marriage. All marriage ends up unhappy because people grow apart, and maybe you have this one chance of happiness, but it has nothing to do with the choice that you make of who to marry. It is just luck. You agree? You agree with Charlotte? Wow, so cynical. Then go to when after she is marrying, go to chapter 22. That is, it's XXII. So Mr. Collins proposed to Elizabeth. Elizabeth says, ew, no, I don't love you and you're repulsive. So Mr. Collins the next day proposes to her best friend. And Charlotte says, yeah, why not? Because when we look at her view of marriage, she's just like, well, I'm not going to be happy in marriage anyway, chances are, so might as well go with this guy, right? And find the paragraph that starts, Sir William and Lady Lucas were speedily applied to for their consent. All right, middle of that, that's a big long paragraph. Middle of that paragraph, it says, Charlotte herself was tolerably composed. She had gained her point and had time to consider of it. Her reflections were, in general, satisfactory. Mr. Collins, to be sure, was neither sensible nor agreeable. When this book uses sensible, it's not using it in the way Kant does. It's using it in the way of like he doesn't have common sense. His society was irksome, and his attachment to her must be imaginary, but still, he would be her husband. Without thinking either highly of men or of matrimony, marriage had always been her object. It was the only honorable provision for well-educated young women of small fortune, and however uncertain of giving happiness, must be their pleasantest preservative from want. This preservative she had now obtained, and at the age of 27, without having ever been handsome, poor Charlotte, she felt all the good luck of it. The least agreeable circumstances in the business was the surprise it must occasion to Elizabeth Bennet, whose friendship she valued beyond that of any other person. Elizabeth would wonder and probably would blame her, and though her resolution was not to be shaken, her feelings must be hurt by such disapprobation. And part of that is because Elizabeth knows, I can't stand this guy. We're not going to be great friends afterwards. Turn the page and find the paragraph that starts, I see what you are feeling. So it says, I see what you are feeling, replied Charlotte. You must be surprised, very much surprised. So lately as Mr. Collins was wishing to marry you. But when you have had time to think it all over, I know you will be satisfied with what I have done. I am not romantic, I never was. I ask only a comfortable home. And considering Mr. Collins' character, connections, and situation in life, I am convinced that my chance of happiness with him is as fair as most people can boast on entering the marriage state. She is consistent with this idea of marriage. But then, then Elizabeth is thinking about it. And at the end of the last paragraph, she says, and to the pang of a friend disgracing herself and sunk in her esteem, was added the distressing conviction that it was impossible for that friend to be tolerably happy in the lot she had chosen. All right, so I think we get Charlotte's point of view then pretty clearly now, and we get Elizabeth's sort of reaction to that point of view. So how do you think the book feels about, so here's what I would say. Kant says you should act in a way that makes you comfortable, everyone acting. Charlotte, I think, does this. Charlotte is like, I'm trying to make the most rational, cold decision about marriage that I possibly can. If this is what our society wants for well-educated women, I think Charlotte is the closest to a feminist in this book, maybe. If this is what our society wants for well-educated women, I guess this is what I am going to do then, whether I like it or not, because this is how I'm going to get, a comfortable position in life, right? It's this rational kind of approach to it. What do you think the book thinks about that kind of decision that she just made? Yeah.
I think the book is against the idea.
Okay.
Because our main protagonist is looking for love in a marriage, and she gets that. And we see all of these couples who go into a marriage, whether it's arranged or in Charlotte's case for comfortableness, and we see how their relationships, their personalities clash, like Mr. and Mrs. Bennett.
Yeah.
Or even Lydia and
Wickham. Yep. And we see with Charlotte, I love how she is kind of happy, but it is only because Mr. Collins goes on long walks, and she can be alone. Okay, good. So we see that like what Charlotte says about her being happy is maybe not actually true at the end of this marriage. What else would you want to say about the way that Charlotte makes her choice of who to marry and how the book feels about it? Yes, and
kind of like going off what Jill said. It's the book very much favors those who like marry for love. It really shows like Lydia, like once Lydia marries Wickham, the book is like hates Lydia.
interesting.
Because it says in like the last chapter that this like Darcy or something, someone is specifically distant.
Yes. So Lydia
She's 15.
Lydia makes choices in a much different way than Charlotte makes choices. Charlotte's making this choice based on like this cold rationality. Here is the practicality of my situation, and so this is the choice I will make, right? Lydia kind of represents the other side of that. So go to volume 3, chapter 9, that's IX. Or if you don't have volumes, it's chapter 51. This is one of my favorite scenes in the book when Lydia comes back from being married and it's just like either clueless or does not care at all that her family has been through so much stress because of her. She's a girl boss. Chapter 51 or volume 3, chapter 9. And it's just right at the very beginning of that, the third paragraph. It says, Lydia's voice was heard in the vestibule. The door was thrown open and she ran into the room. So compare that to Charlotte's actions, which are all very staid and like very like calm and collected. Lydia, when she comes into a room, she's throwing back the door. She comes in this flurry. Her mother stepped forwards, embraced her, welcomed her with rapture, gave her hand with an affectionate smile to Wickham, who followed his lady and wished them both joy with an alacrity, that means quickness, speed, which showed no doubt of their happiness. Their reception for Mr. Bennet, to whom they then turned, was not quite so cordial. His countenance rather gained an austerity, and he scarcely opened his lips. The easy assurance of the young couple indeed was enough to provoke him. Elizabeth was disgusted, and even Miss Bennet was shocked. Miss Bennet, there is Jane. Lydia was Lydia still, untamed, unabashed, wild, noisy, and fearless. She turned from sister to sister, demanding their congratulations, and when at length they all sat down, looked eagerly round the room, took notice of some little altercation in it, and observed with a laugh that it was a great while since she had been there. Look at those descriptors for Lydia. Untamed, unabashed, wild, noisy, and fearless. That book these days, or that description these days, we might say, this character is awesome. Like she's going against social conventions. She's doing what she wants. She's untamed and unabashed, and she says what she feels. There's a distinctly different tone towards Lydia here, right? How does the book feel about Lydia? Yeah.
That she's crazy. Because like, again, our main character, Elizabeth, she cares about these social cues.
Yeah.
And Lydia's social.
Right. Yeah. Good. So she's not considering the ethics of the situation at all. Yeah. Okay.
Well, I was thinking in situations.
Yeah.
Maybe Jane Austen has, as long as there's a more rational reason for marriage, then it's better. Because if we think of
Charlotte situation. I
Yeah.
mean, it's not the best.
Yeah.
It doesn't. It seems a lot less crazy in Jane Austen when considering Lydia's relationship.
So if we think that Charlotte represents just understanding knowledge, and we think that Lydia represents just the sensible, I don't know. The book might be more over here than over there. Yeah, because if marriage is an ethical choice that they make in the society, and you think about the ways that marriage can help or harm the community, it is definitely better for the community if you stay over here. And yet it's not really better for the personal if you stay over here, because we recognize that Charlotte is not going to be happy in this marriage, right? Part of this is genre conventions. If we were in a drama that was written in Regency times, especially by a woman, it would be all about Charlotte, and it would be a tragedy about how she has to behave this way, right? But we are in a rom-com, but we're not in a 2022 rom-com where we can go over here and do what we want. We're still in this rom-com with all of these social conventions that prevent us from acting out completely. However, you're still supposed to act out a little bit. So let's look finally at Darcy and Elizabeth's love. They're so cute. All right. Go to chapter 58 or volume 3, chapter 16. That's 10 VI. So they're going for a walk as they do. Chapter 58 or volume 3, chapter 16. They're going for a walk, and Elizabeth now knows that Darcy bailed Lydia out and bailed the family out. And she thanks him for it. And he says, if you will thank me, that's the beginning of the paragraph, few paragraphs in. If you will thank me, he replied, let it be for yourself alone, that the wish of giving happiness to you might add force to the other inducements which led me on. I shall not attempt to deny it, but your family owe me nothing. Much as I respect them, I believe I thought only of you. Oh, that's a line that people like. Elizabeth was too much embarrassed to say a word. After a short pause, her companion added, you are too generous to trifle with me. If your feelings are still what they were last April, tell me so at once. My affections and wishes are unchanged, but one word from you will silence me on this subject forever. So he's just like, I can't just have normal conversations with you anymore. I really need to know, have you changed your mind about me? It's kind of his second chances, right? It's the second proposal. And Elizabeth, feeling all the more than common awkwardness and anxiety of his situation, now forced herself to speak, and immediately, though not very fluently, gave him to understand that her sentiments had undergone so material a change since the period to which he alluded as to make her receive with gratitude and pleasure his present assurances. The happiness which this reply produced was such as he had probably never felt before, and he expressed himself on the occasion as sensibly and as warmly as a man violently in love can be supposed to do. Had Elizabeth been able to encounter his eye, she can't even look him in the eye, she's just so flustered. She might have seen how well the expression of heartfelt delight diffused over his face became him, like he's looking good. But though she could not look, she could listen, and he told her of feelings which, improving of what importance she was to him, made his affection every moment more valuable. So when we look at the scale now, let's think about the Darcy to Elizabeth scale. At the beginning of the book, Elizabeth fancies that she makes choices based on rationality. She is like, oh, I'm such a good judge of character. I take in all the evidence. I approach things like a psychologist, right? Wickham, I know he's in the right because, the way he presented it was very clear and the evidence shows, but then we start to realize that Elizabeth probably starts more on the sensible side, where she is making choices based on her feelings. She might not realize it, but she is trusting Wickham because he's a hottie, and not Darcy because he called her ugly, right? It's based on these feelings that she has. Darcy, on the other hand, is probably starting more over here with understanding, not wanting to interact with people because he's a little bit, nervous or whatever. I want to stay cold and kind of rational here. Where does the book end up in terms of where we want them to meet together? Actually, let's put this as a graph. Read with the graph. We have understanding down here, and rationality, nope, sensibility here. I think we've got Elizabeth starting here, maybe not all the way there. Right here. She's starting here and she's kind of moving closer down here, right? And then we've got Darcy, who's starting kind of like right here. And I think he's moving closer over here. And hopefully the idea is that, not like Charlotte says, hopefully the idea is that from that point on, they'll kind of, stay on the same wavelength and go on forever happily in love, right? Over time. But there's a point where they kind of like meet together. And I think that's this point in the book. So tell me, what is kind of like the sign we get that they've met together on that point of understanding and sensibility? Yeah.
I think it's like Elizabeth realizing that he still has feelings for her and he's waiting for her. He has been.
Yeah.
It wasn't just like a one-time thing.
Okay, awesome. So that she's seeing this kind of like consistency in where he's ended up too. Okay, awesome. Any other signs in that little section that they've like changed to the point where they can like agree on their decision to get married? Yeah.
I think referencing the chapter where
Yeah.
we see that she's a lot more sensitive rather than she's strictly married. She's married for the house.
Yes, awesome. So she's like kind of realizing that there's a way of rationally looking at this the same way that Charlotte did. Like, I want a good situation as well. And that's not a bad thing in this book. In some books, that might be a bad thing, that somebody sees someone's house and they're like, this is a nice house, I want to marry this guy. That doesn't sound like it would be like something we are appreciating. But in a book where those are her circumstances, we celebrate the fact that she is realizing that as a woman, she does need to be ambitious with who she marries. There's also this part where it says that Darcy is violently in love, that he's lost some of that coldness. Being violently in love means that he could be a little bit out of control, and the book doesn't want you to be fully in control all of the time.
I love that term, violently.
I know, I like it too, especially with Darcy though, right? Because doesn't that seem a little bit out of character? I think that's the point. It's shown this kind of character arc. Bailing Lydia and Wickham out was not the rational choice to make. It was the love, sensible in Kant's way, the feelings choice to make, and the book is celebrating that. Okay, so we've got the last prompt now on your thesis thing. There are so many foils in this book. So let's read that prompt together. It says, in a literary work, a minor character, often known as a foil, possesses traits that emphasize by contrast or comparison the distinctive characteristics and qualities of the main character. For example, the ideas or behaviors of a minor character might be used to highlight the weaknesses or strengths of the main character. Choose a novel or play in which a minor character serves as a foil for the main character. Then write an essay in which you analyze how the relation between the minor character and the major character illuminates the meaning of the work. What is that code for, illuminates the meaning of the work? No, they actually don't tell us to write good in this one, right? Well, they don't mention that, so I guess you could have a bad essay for this one. Illuminates the meaning of the work is the theme, right? It's got to have some kind of theme about what it reveals about humanity. There are so many foils in this. You've got the Jane Elizabeth foil. You've got the Bingley. We didn't even talk about the Bingley Darcy foil and how Bingley rents and Darcy owns and so on. And Bingley moves quickly and Darcy moves slowly. You've got the Mr. and Mrs. Bennet foil, I think. You've got the, Lydia Charlotte, maybe even Darcy and Elizabeth. Those don't quite fit because it's talking about a minor and major character. But you can take any angle you want to for this one. I'm going to give you 3 minutes to write your thesis. So it's another timed one. Thank you. Okay, 3 minutes on the clock. Go ahead. loud. All right. I want to move on to Streetcar Named Desire now. So instead of coming up to the board, whoever the last four were, they got out of it. And I want you to pair up. We'll have to do, how about you two pair up and then you do a group of three, and share your thesis statements with each other and give them one piece of criticism that they can help to make their thesis even better. Okay, go ahead.
I said Pride and Prejudice uses the foil of Lydia in comparison to the protagonist Elizabeth. As Lydia portrayed in a negative as Lydia portrayed in a negative tone is wild and simply following passion. Elizabeth uses both emotion and rationality to find love, emphasizing the importance of the two in making large life decisions.
One piece of criticism.
Okay, make sure you give them something they can do to make that thesis better.
The phrase large life decisions is redundant.
Yeah.
Maybe, I don't know. Life decisions are already like assumed to be large. Well, life decisions can also be redundant. You might just say decisions.
What about important decisions?
I don't know. Pride and Prejudice often uses Catherine as volatile. Self-determination rather than sufficient people thought of as wise and experienced.
Yeah, I think you could mention a little bit, like the challenges of like the child
All right, you got some, oh, one more little bit about what they can do better. Okay, we're gonna wrap up Pride and Prejudice. Did you love it? Only okay? Anyone love Pride and Prejudice? I did too. I really liked it this time rereading it. I don't know what it was about this time, but the lightness felt really nice to it. If you anybody absolutely hate Pride and Prejudice, if you hated it and you're like, I know I am not going to want to write my essay about this book, you can drop your book off on my desk. You don't need it anymore. But if you are kind of so-so or you're not quite sure, you will be able to write the next essay on either Streetcar Named Desire or Pride and Prejudice. And if you're thinking like, yes, let's just get this essay out of the way, I can write about Pride and Prejudice and then I don't have to think about essays for a little while, that prompt is up on Canvas and you could start it right away while it's fresh. But we're going to move on to Streetcar Named Desire, which is vastly different in tone, still has many of the same topics. So it is about gender and it's about love and it's about marriage. And yet it takes a, completely 180 turn on how it feels about those things and the possibilities of those things. It's dark. You maybe need a trigger warning for this one. It's one that does get challenged sometimes in schools. So if I don't want to give away anything, but you can imagine with those themes, kind of what comes up in this book, if that's a concern to you, come see me. I'll give you some better heads up for it. But it's written by this guy named Tennessee Williams. That's not the name he was born with, it's a pen name. But he was this little kid in the South. He was born in the South, Southern boy, who loved reading. Tennessee Williams. He was born Thomas Lanier Williams III, also fancy. And he was kind of sickly as a child. And so he spent a lot of time in bed. And in bed, he learned to love poetry and plays and books, and he would just read all the time. That's actually a common story for authors, is that they are sick or they have a long period of sickness in their childhood, and then they grow to love reading because that's kind of all that was available to them. But his parents were not supportive of that interest at all. He comes from a pretty abusive background, both physically and mentally. His mom was like the church lady, like very Christian, and wanted him to follow all of those rules. And his dad was like big masculine guy, really interested in masculinity. And so when Tennessee Williams didn't try out for the high school football team, that was a huge problem for his dad, that kind of dad. And Tennessee Williams was one of the few openly gay writers in the 50s. So he was like not interested in masculinity in the same way his dad was interested in masculinity, right? And he wasn't interested in the church in the same way his mom was interested in the church. So it was a pretty rough childhood. He had one bright spot in his childhood, and that was his older sister. Her name was Rose. But in her late teens, Rose was diagnosed as schizophrenic and was taken to a mental hospital. And he would visit her every day. They still had this great relationship, like they loved each other. But in the 50s, there was a common procedure that they gave to many people, especially women, called lobotomy. And Rose underwent a lobotomy in the 50s. And so after that, I mean, it kind of didn't always, but after that, it kind of worked in a way. Like Rose was more complacent and more like she was happier, I guess, but she also was not the same person. She was kind of not totally catatonic, but just sort of like not there anymore. But he kept visiting her until his death. She outlived him. She lived into her 90s, actually. And I believe that was into the 1990s. I think Rose lived that long. Anyway, so that becomes really important to this play because this play is also thinking about mental illness. He went to college and he wasn't a great student, but he was really interested in plays. So he would hop around from school to school and would stay at whatever school would let him produce a play. And his first play to be published was called The Glass Menagerie. Has anyone read that one? It was really successful. People really loved The Glass Menagerie, went to Broadway. He got a great literary agent from that. But Tennessee Williams did not handle expectations like that very well. He was kind of, the success kind of backfired, where everyone was like, okay, your first play was amazing. What's your second play going to be? And it caused him a lot of stress. So that is when he started drinking heavily and abusing pills like barbiturates and amphetamines, the Judy Garland combo, where it was back and forth between the uppers and the downers, just like a really, really rough lifestyle. But he wrote the second play, and it was Streetcar Named Desire, which was massively successful, more successful than Glass Menagerie even. And it won a Pulitzer. And now everybody is saying, okay, what's the third one going to be? And then that one's successful. What's the fourth one going to be? And he was the type of person that he would have 100 people saying this is the best play ever written. And then one person who's like, not as good as the others, or they had this problem. And that would crush him. So the drug use got worse. The alcoholism got worse. He actually lived longer than you would think based on his behavior. He lived until he was 71. And the way he died is so sad. Also really darkly funny, so sorry, but he's taking pills out of a nasal spray cap. Like, I don't know why, but putting the pills in there and then doing that. And he inhales the nasal spray cap and he chokes on it and dies from that. So he kind of dies from drug use, but not an overdose. Like, it's so tragic. So anyway, that's Tennessee Williams. So that kind of gives you a sense of the themes of the play, right? Like, we can kind of see what's to be expected of this. The reason we're watching the movie first is because this is meant to be seen as a play first, I think. And the movie's great because it's produced or it's directed by the same guy who directed it when it was on Broadway. And it uses most of the same actors. So Marlon Brando plays Stanley. The prompt is going to be about Marlon Brando, by the way, so watch out for him. I hope we get to his part. Stella is the same person who was on Broadway. And Mitch is another main character that was also on Broadway. The person who's different is actually our very main character, Blanche. And Blanche is played by Vivian Leigh from Gone with the Wind. So they got another actress for her, but she was very much informed by how the first actress played her on Broadway. I don't remember what her name was. So we're gonna watch a bit of the movie. And then it will take us, it's over 2 hours, so it will take us a couple class periods to finish it. Before I start that movie, let me just tell you about the assignments you're gonna have with this one. But where are my characters? No, they're yellow. They're not that. All right, everyone gets to be a character. Do it randomly, and then if you watch a bit of the movie and you're like, no, I do not want to do that. It's not role play. It's too abusive to be role play. But if you don't want to do this character, you don't want to focus on this one for this just this worksheet, then you can trade with each other. All right, so your assignment with this is we're going to be watching the movie. I will keep track and I will tell you kind of where in the play we ended up to in the movie, and you can read until that part. So watch the movie, go home, read that part of the book, and you can keep going like that. If you want to read a little ahead, that'll be fine. It's not going to spoil the movie, whatever. And then you will be in charge. You'll be in small groups, and you will be in charge of teaching different parts of this book to the class. So you'll be assigned different scenes from this book. We'll get those assignments next time. So on March 1st, you'll need to have these character sheets done about your character, and you'll need to have the book read with annotations. And if you have a school copy, you'll just use Post-it notes for that to show me that you're interacting with the text, because there are some important differences between the movie and the book, and this will allow you to focus in on the language rather than just the performances. The character sheets, it says supporting evidence from the play. By that, I mean the book play, where you can give me a little, some quotations about how it supports how you're reading these things. Okay, I flew through that. I can clear up stuff next time, but I really want to start this movie. So while I am going back there to start it, do you have any questions I can answer?
So are this stuff, are we supposed to, besides the supporting evidence for the definitions, does it matter when we base it off the book?
Well, they are so similar that it will be the same. But no, it doesn't matter. If you want to, if you find some nuance there, you can change it. But the book is where I want you to find the evidence. So your prompt is about, well, I'm putting this on, your prompt is about Stanley and why he would cast this actor as Stanley. Marlon Brando at the time, and honestly just forever, was seen and is seen as like really hunky. Like he's really good looking. And he's one of those guys that like everyone will agree on that. Gay, straight, male, female, everyone's like, yeah, that's a good looking guy. He's kind of like a Chris Hemsworth that way, you know? And yet he plays this guy who from the beginning is just like awful, like really off-putting. So your prompt is going to be about why they would cast this guy in this role.